How do you win the race against risk and safely lock down your cloud data without hiring an army of administrators? Introducing Least Privilege Automation, only from Varonis. Varonis eliminates data exposures while your employees work and while they sleep, making intelligent decisions about who needs access to data and who doesn't. Our cloud-native solution analyzes permissions and sharing links, monitors access activity, and classifies sensitive data. Because Varonis knows who can and who does access critical data, our automation safely remediates risky links and permissions. Learn more at securityweekly.com/Varonis. Mimecast has released its State of Ransomware Readiness Report for 2022, finding that most cybersecurity leaders experience the same or increasing numbers of ransomware attacks over last year. Together with Mimecast, organizations can stand strong in the face of cyber attacks, human error, technical failure, and work protected. Mimecast, work protected. Visit securityweekly.com/Mimecast to learn more.
Application Security Weekly delivers interviews and news from the worlds of AppSec, DevOps, and all the other ways people find and fix software flaws. Join us as we explore how the latest news highlights modern security practices or reminds us of the missing ones. We also bring insights from interviews on topics from training to threat modeling, from open source tools to cloud-native techniques, plus an occasional reference from new wave to synthwave. Find us at securityweekly.com/subscribe or look for Application Security Weekly wherever you pick your podcasts.
Welcome back to Business Security Weekly. I am your host, Matt Alderman, joined by Jason Albuquerque, Ben Carr, and Tyler Robinson. Our teams from Security Weekly and SC Media were on site at RSA Conference 2023, delivering in-depth reporting, analysis, and interviews from the conference. If you were unable to join us in person or didn't manage to catch our video live stream from Broadcast Alley, you can access all of our RSAC 2023 coverage at securityweekly.com/RSAC. All right, gentlemen, it has been a few weeks since we've done articles because we've been doing all the interviews from RSA Conference. So I had a lot to choose from. And we're going to have this beautiful little theme of some CISO topics to start with, to start our leadership discussion. And this first article reminded me of one of the sessions at RSA Conference that I unfortunately did not get a chance to attend, which is this concept of, do you really need a CISO? Because there are a lot of organizations that actually don't have CISOs listed as part of their leadership team, and they're publicly traded companies. So do you really need a CISO, Jason? Ben?
Well, I guess from a title perspective, maybe not. From a responsibility perspective, absolutely. You need someone who's going to be in charge of, we were just talking about, data security, the security of the organization, managing risk, managing your technology risk. There needs to be someone at the helm. Absolutely. Maybe the title isn't CISO. Maybe it's a chief risk officer. Maybe it's, some other title. But from a responsibility and accountability perspective, absolutely. Whether it's on staff or someone you bring in, we see a lot of vCISOs, virtual CISOs coming in, right?
Yeah, I don't know how in today's world you don't, especially given the upcoming SEC proposed changes, right? Regulatory issues, the breaches that we've seen. How can you not? I mean, it always surprises me when you talk to a company that's been around for a while or is publicly traded, and they don't have someone, or we've got a director that does it, right? Or we've got somebody in the IT organization. It's not.
No.
It doesn't pass muster, right? I mean, if you're a stockholder, if you're investing, like, you should be asking these questions, right? If you're a company that's going public and you don't have somebody, I mean, I would be really concerned if it was me, especially given today's environment. Now, the virtual CISO, yeah, I mean, companies of a certain size, it's hard to justify, but you still need somebody who has overall responsibility for it, whether you outsource that in a virtual capacity or have somebody on site. But you got to have somebody. I mean, it doesn't make sense.
And somebody who has a voice to leadership, right? Because one of the things that blew my mind in this article is it says only 12% of CISOs have a seat at their company's board of directors. That was that blew my mind. That they don't have that ability.
I actually took it a different way, Jason, because it says have seats on their company's boards of directors, and I find that shocking that 12% actually have a seat on the board of directors.
Yeah.
Like, I don't see that.
Yeah, maybe I
don't see that.
Maybe I read that wrong.
So maybe it was written poorly, and what they meant was have a seat at the table with the board of directors. I wouldn't be surprised by that stat, right? I think that's low, and I think
Mm,
every CISO should be talking with the board of directors, and every CISO should be considered part of executive staff, right? It's
agreed.
just whether virtual or not. If you don't have that voice in the room, how do you know you're making the right
Hmm.
business decisions? Like you wouldn't have your your C staff get together without your CFO, without your legal officer, right? Like I don't get it. So yeah, that stat blew me away, and I'm hoping it was worded wrong, and that's not what they
Hmm.
meant. But if it is, I wanted to see those people and talk to them and understand how they got there, because
Right.
I'm not seeing it in general practice.
And you
Yeah, I
said a
think
key
that's
word.
the biggest issue, right? Is having that voice at the table. Whether you have a director that's filling that role in or an IT, that doesn't mean they have the same the same executive voice. They don't have the same meeting schedule. They may not even have the same purview into
Hmm.
budgets, roadmaps, and or the business strategy from a strategic standpoint. Like, who's guiding the security and technology? Almost all companies now should be considering themselves a technology company, and therefore that means they have to have technology initiatives, which means they should be having security initiatives. Each one of those, without a voice at the table, then becomes a secondary and tertiary goal and roadmap for every other department. A CFO is not going to be thinking foremost and not allocating budget and
Hmm.
having that first level of interaction in order to build those strategies and get that advice and consult those conversations.
Yeah.
So without that voice, I don't think any company can run in today's technological environment.
Right. And again, to get back to the article, do you need the title CISO? No. Do you need someone who has those responsibilities and is accountable and has that communication line directly to leadership? Absolutely. 100%. Tyler, you said it. I mean, if the pandemic did anything, it turned every company into a technology company. Everything. Restaurant business, hospitality business. It doesn't matter what vertical you're in anymore. You're a technology business.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think we take for granted sometimes, like the nuance that we understand that other people who might not be in it don't understand, right? And in the same way that, like, we wouldn't understand necessarily all the nuance of finance or all
Mhm.
the nuance of legal in those discussions, right? We may have more than the average understanding of somebody, but we don't understand it in the level of that same detail. So I want to be clear, and Tyler's, and I agree with you. Like, does it need to have that title? No, it doesn't need to. But what it isn't is it, like, the CISO role is not a technologist role.
Mhm.
It's someone who has an understanding of technology and can play in that realm, but it's not a technologist, right? It's someone who can bring technology into the realm of business and understand the business perspectives, which is why, in my mind, it's so critical to have somebody who is sitting at that table, can understand business, but can apply technology in the right way to get the right business outcomes.
Mhm.
So this is the little nuance in this article that I wanted to get this debate going, right? Look, if I'm a chief information security officer, but I do not have a seat at the executive leadership position, what good is that? Versus having a director or a vice president that does actually have a seat at the executive leadership that has the responsibilities. I think sometimes the title is
Mhm.
loaded, right? And we have this thing called chief in it.
Mhm.
Therefore, everybody assumes it's an executive leadership position, but in some organizations, it's actually not. And I
Right.
think that does this position a disservice because I agree with all of you. The responsibilities have to be there. I don't care about the title, but some people care about the title without the right reporting structure, and I think it just hurts us.
Absolutely. There are folks with the chief in their title that are so far down the org chart that
Yeah.
their communication gets filtered. It's the game of telephone by the time it gets to leadership, right? And that's not what we can afford. We can't afford to have the game of telephone. We can't afford for our communications to be filtered 3 times before it hits leadership because it's
Yeah. And
it's other people's
it takes
motivations and
experience.
perspectives that it gets
It
filtered
takes
through.
experience, right, Jason? I mean,
Yeah.
like, I think a lot of people get into this in their first time out. They go for an interview for a CISO role, or the person who's responsible for security in the organization, and there'll be those opportunities where somebody say this role reports to a guy who reports to the CIO.
Mhm.
Yeah, no, like,
Right. And
that's a
then
hard no for me.
the
Like, I'm
CIO
sorry, I'm gonna
reports to the
pass.
to the
Yeah,
CEO, right?
right. The COO who
That's right.
reports to the CEO,
That's right.
and he doesn't, and the CIO doesn't have general all the time in participation in the C staff. So you've got to have those dialogues up front, and I think companies need to be aware of that too. And look, the more people that they see that are like, yeah, I'm not going to take that job. Like it'll start to have repercussions in the company. Like maybe we're approaching this the wrong way. And if you're working with a recruiter, you
Yeah.
got to work with the right recruiters who understand this role. There's specifics to it,
In
right?
the
And you got
sad
to understand the role.
the sad part about it, Ben, is that when the stuff hits the fan, who's the first head on the chopping block?
Yeah,
Right? They may
exactly.
be 3 tiers filtered down, but whose neck is on the line? That's the sad part.
like it's a bad place to be when you're talking to customers, and it's like, what are you going to say? Like, I couldn't make any of those decisions because I actually don't have the authority.
Right.
Like, you can't say that, right? You're throwing the company under the bus. That isn't going to work. So you're taking it on the chin, and that's why CISOs have this reputation of being the first to get hit when bad stuff happens to the company. And so I think all that needs to change. And there's some other articles like later on that we'll talk about that I think just reinforce that, and the discussions that you need to have when you're thinking about this role, and companies need to elevate where they think about this position. You don't have 80 C-level executives, but you do need somebody responsible for security.
Yeah, absolutely. So that leads into number 2, because you guys started to go there already, and that is how an employee contract can actually save the CISO from success and or potential jail time. Now, this is an article off of the Joe Sullivan case on how to protect the CISO. This article is great because it spells out what you should have in your employee contract if you want to go in to be that guy.
Yeah,
right.
And one of the main bullet points is clear understanding of roles, responsibilities, and reporting. Yeah.
Yeah.
That is one of the major bullet points in this article. Definitely, that's what we just talked through.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Well, and I think far too people even are thinking at the C-level, who are going into the C-level roles, that aren't the CFO, chief of legal, and the CEO. Those are the 3 that everybody thinks about. But like when you start to think about, the CISO and the level of responsibility, and now the level of potential regulatory or legal action that someone can take against you, or just shareholder suits, right?
Yep.
You need to think about, what are they doing as far as, litigation? How are you covered by D&O insurance? Do you have an employment contract? So if something happens and you are the scapegoat, do you have some type of parachute on the backside? Are you thinking about, continued medical coverage? Are you thinking about, how are they going to cover lawsuit costs? Those kind of things. I mean, all those things are really, really important, and you need to negotiate that up front.
That's
just table stakes.
I mean, huge is directors and officers insurance. Like you have to make sure that you're on that. That's in this day and age, absolutely. You need to be sure that you're held harmless. And
the general answer would be, well, if you're working for the company, you're covered. No, you're not. Like, that's not the way it works.
You have to
be a named officer of the company. Yeah. To be covered by D&O, and it can get really expensive.
Yeah, which goes back to the previous article. It is not considered an officer in a lot of them because they're not at the executive level, so they're not named in the D&O policy. Right. That's one of the challenges.
Yeah, and I mean, if you're in that watered down reporting structure, you're not going to be on the D&O. There's no way. It's not going to happen, right? And the other piece too that I really like that this article called out is the whistleblower protection. Because if things are smelling funny and you need to raise your hand, you should be able to without risk.
Yes. Ask the FBI how that's going these days.
Right.
Just say.
But I mean, I get it.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%, Jason. Because look, if something's not going as planned or something doesn't look right, you should be able to bring it up, get protection to get it addressed and fixed. But that doesn't always happen either, even when you have whistleblower protection.
Right. True.
Well, but it's also just internally, like in how the roles negotiated and what your understanding of the responsibilities are, right? Do you report to the CEO? Do you report to the CIO? Like if an incident is happening, do you have direct relationship with the board where you can go out of band and say, hey, look, I have concerns about this. This is an issue, and I feel a responsibility to report on this, right? To someone at the board level. And if it's above that, report externally if you really need to, if it's a legal issue. But I mean, all that needs to be understood so there's clear understanding when the stuff hits the fan. What do you do? How do you do it, right? Are you going to feel comfortable in doing the right thing? And you need to have ethics and morality in this part of the business as well. I mean, if you don't, you're not going to get very far. So I think companies will generally respect that, and if they don't, if you're having those conversations and you're not getting the right answers, that's a red flag. Like
Big time.
maybe it's not the right fit then.
Yeah, and Ben, you touched on it a little bit. You know, it's not only having these things in place for while you're there, but also having provisions in place for your exit strategy, right? Because one big thing could be a non-compete or a non-disclosure clause that you're going to be held to, right? You know, if you have a non-compete, you may not be able to go work for another like company. You need to pay attention to all the language in your employment agreement, like things like non-compete and non-disclosure. You want a non-disclosure in place because if something were to go down, you don't want the company to speak bad about you or anything like that, right? So you got to have some of these things in place.
Yeah, and that's part of what you look for on your exit contract, right? Or not, you negotiate it ahead of time, but in the exit, right, you say, if I'm terminated without cause, then my non-compete goes away.
That's right.
On termination. So those are things that everybody needs to think about. Like it's just, again, it's got to be table stakes for CISO level discussions. And the more everyone is talking about this, and everyone is coming with these things to the table, it will become the standard and people won't get pushback, right? And so I think it makes it, the more informed we all are, the better the holistically will be in these negotiations.
So Ben, even defining for cause is something you have to look at.
Yes.
Like what is considered
You have
cause
to say
and
what
what's
is
not.
for cause.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's going to be called
That's right.
out.
That's
It's
right.
going to be specified.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because you don't want to be caught in a termination for cause of something that's out of your control because you don't have the authority to deal with it. Like you got to look at all those clauses.
I've gotten very specific in the language that's in stuff I talk about. Yeah. Because you have to.
You have to.
Look, nobody likes this, right? But like the last thing you want to be is in some type of litigation with something that's unclear. And so you want to make sure you feel that you're protected. And my advice is consult an attorney. There are specific attorneys in this field, not the security necessarily, but in the employment contract law where you can talk to somebody and they'll be able to advise you on the specifics and review contracts and look at all of that. It's a piece of the legal practice. It's not some oddball thing.
And you want to know what? It's much easier to have these conversations as you're courting, right? As you're courting with each other than to go a year or two and then have to revisit it. That's a hard conversation, right? So the time is now. If you're looking at a job, you haven't been hired yet, and you're still in that courting phase, now is the time to start having those conversations and negotiating.
That being said, I've heard of a couple instances, Jason, where somebody I know, CISO, who's done this a couple times, didn't have one in place, and somebody came to him they were having kind of an offsite meeting. He said, look, we're really happy. We love that you're here and all. Like, are you feeling comfortable? Is there anything? And he brought that up at that time and said, yeah, look, this is one thing that concerns me. And they were, they liked the relationship with him, and they said, look, we want to make you comfortable, and we don't want you to feel like you're going to go somewhere else or you're going to have to look around. So he was able to put that in midterm, right?
That's great.
But yeah, it's much easier if you do it on the front side.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So I have similar stories, Ben, of people who have merged with companies, played that role, and then decided not to take that role because they wouldn't get those protections in the new combined organization, right? So
yes,
yeah.
And look at it like that should be like in a change of control situation. What happens, right? How do you handle that? I know another person who change of control happened, and they had there was a window. She had accelerated vesting outside of that window, and so if you can look at those things, negotiate as much as you can up front, and realize that when you're talking about a C-level position, it's expected that some of this stuff is going to be negotiated and talked about, right? It's not just about your annual comp and your bonus anymore. There's a lot more to, is the role the right role for you and for the organization? And everybody has to feel comfortable in it. You want to, if you're making hard calls and hard decisions, the last thing you want to worry about in terms of a breach is, oh geez, what happens on the backside of this? Right. And that's the last thing the company wants too. That's something you should talk about with them and say, look, if things are going south and we're having a massive incident, you don't want my mental capacity 70% involved in the breach and 30% involved in like, how am I landing softly after this? Right? You want me 100% focused on how do we solve this problem we're having right now? And I know no matter what happens, I'm taking care of on the backside. And hopefully for everybody, it's, things go well, the breach happens, you're still employed and everything goes right. But if it's not, you just don't want that bifurcated mental effort going on in those high stress times, which is why these things get negotiated.
Yeah, absolutely. one of your strategies was to go talk to the board, but article number 3, board CISO collaboration still under 50%. I mean, the SEC
Right.
may change some of this, but look, even if you got whistleblower protections to be able to go to the board, do you have a relationship with the board that you could even have that outreach and conversation with? I mean, there's still a gap here.
Oh yeah, again, these
There
numbers
is.
these numbers are staggering, right? It says approximately a third of board members only see CISOs at board presentations. They have no relationship with the CISO outside of a board presentation. Only 50% regularly, of board members regularly interact with the CISO. That shows that there's not a strong relationship between the cybersecurity risk leader and the leadership of the company.
Yeah, and I think it's both surprising and unsurprising. So the surprising side for me is if you talk to most public companies or even private companies and you do analysis of their risk, right, and you look at their risk matrix, you'll find often that cyber or the security risk side of it is often the number one, if not, it's always in the top 3, right, of the risks. So you would think that the board would say, if this is our number one risk or in the top 3, I want to know all about it. But I think generally they're somewhat uninformed, right? And they're counting on it being handled by somebody, and that could be the CIO or some other exec who they've normally dealt with in the past. And so there's not necessarily that relationship. And then on the C-level side for the CISO, I think you have a lot of people who are new to the game, and so they're not used to the difference in the role of a CISO versus a VP of security, right? And that C-level role has a different responsibility matrix, and you need to interact with the board. And one of the things that somebody told me once, and I really think this is really smart advice, is you need to find one person on the board who you can have a relationship with. And what does a relationship mean? It doesn't mean like you talk to them in the board meeting. It means outside of that meeting, you're having somewhat regular conversations. Maybe you're just grabbing a coffee with them. Maybe you're going out to dinner once in a while with them. You're talking generally about the business, right? But you're also, in a way, almost using them for mentoring, right? Because hopefully you're in a CISO level, you have aspirations to keep going further. And so what does that look like? What does board level participation look like? Utilize them. The more you ask questions, the more you seem interested in what they're doing, the more it's going to be a mutual relationship and not just, this person's here to try to get more money out of us, right? And try to figure out how to get more investment. You should think about things outside of the investment portfolio, and then you're developing a true relationship. And then when you have a problem, you can call them up on the phone and say, hey, Bob, I've got some concerns about this, right? Can we walk through some scenarios? Now you're playing the game. Now you're involved with the board of directors.
100%.
So I don't know, Jason, what your thoughts on that?
All day long. I have a standing meeting every other week with a board member. Every other week, where it could be as simple as us jumping on a Teams meeting for a half an hour and doing a gut check with each other or going to grab dinner. It's a have to have. It's a must have. And then the beauty of it is when there are struggles on either side, right? I need help understanding this. You can help them understand. You can help clarify. You can help, bring them to the table and get clarification to them. But it's also when you're struggling with getting something done. So many times the board member's gone off and said, let me reach out to this person, that person, this person. And by the next morning, things are solved. Things are on their way. Things are moving forward. You're getting the help you need. Right? So, I mean.
You're like, hey, I don't understand why Susan said that in the board meeting. You can't go to Susan, but you can maybe go to Bob, and Bob will tell you, here's the backstory on how that's going and what was really meant. And you didn't get the context of it because you're not involved in those other decisions. It's almost like that. It's the red phone between Russia and the US, right? Where you can just pick it up and de-escalate.
Being able to navigate the politics of the business.
Yeah.
Throwing a simple question out there, asking why, that can help you navigate the politics. Well, this is why this person typically has a stance like this. And here's some advice on how to maybe communicate this a little bit differently for that type of a personality, right? And it gets you those conversations. Half an hour every other week is worth its weight in gold for me.
Yeah. And then before you go into the board presentation, right? Like, hey, can you look over these 2 slides? Because I just don't know how the board's gonna hit.
You can
they're gonna tell you,
throw your
that's
pitch
horrible
out there in that half an hour and see what kind of result you're getting. Absolutely.
Yeah, that will pay
article.
off massive dividends.
Yes. You guys are doing a great job. Like I told you, I kind of teed them up this week. Like it's been a few weeks. I got you guys going.
We're not passionate or anything, man.
Nah, not even a little bit.
not even a little bit. Next article on the CISO trail is CISO's pushing for mental health in cybersecurity. Like, finally, like
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, look, the role has a lot of stress associated to. Okay, look, you're not a surgeon and people are sitting on the table ready to die, but it is still a pretty stressful position.
Very. Extremely stressful. And we've been talking about this for 4 years on this show.
Yeah, we talked about this in the second article, right? You're negotiating for a personal counselor in your employment contract, right? Just your therapist, couch time, half hour a week.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, look, it's mental health for CISOs, but the whole security org, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
it can just be super stressful. You got to figure out how to not burn yourself out, and how to not burn your team out. It's really hard.
Yeah, and in the leadership position, it's extremely important that you take care of yourself. You cannot take care of a team and lead a team if you're not good yourself. So you have to look at yourself. You have to make sure you're in a good spot. And again, when statistics get thrown out here, like 91% of CISOs saying they suffer moderate or high stress, that's an alarm for me, right? It's 60% they don't disconnect at all. At all? That's a huge risk. Huge risk.
And when you do disconnect, like that's when everything happens, is when you disconnect.
Yeah, right.
Like you're on vacation and you get a call that a breach happened, like inevitably. So yeah. I like we talk a lot about the number of people that want to get into the role, but Jason, I would assume you'd agree with me that, like, I'm amazed that anyone sometimes wants to get into the role, because the amount of conflicting interest and stress and tension that goes with it.
Agreed.
Yeah. With the reward comes risk, and sometimes that is mental health and
you call
burnout.
it the blessing and the curse of being in the role.
Yeah, exactly right. We're going to talk burnout in a second. I do want to cover this article quickly, how cybersecurity is impacting another chief executive title, Chief Supply Chain Officer.
Where does that sit in the organization? Where in the org chart is that, Matt?
I'm pretty sure it's under procurement, under
That's
finance.
an IC 6 levels down. Yeah.
Right.
Everybody needs a chief title. Go ahead, Matt. Sorry.
I was just going to say, having built a third-party risk management process and manage it for a large national bank, what I think is interesting in this article is we're not thinking about other aspects of the supply chain.
Mm.
Third-party risk management programs don't necessarily think about all the other components from a supply chain perspective. And what this article is basically saying is, look, we have to probably revamp our processes a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
You think? Like, the last 3 years should be pretty eye-opening for most people
100%.
that we got a supply chain issue.
Right. And more of that supply chain is technology oriented. More and more.
On some level, everything, right? Like just shipping the toilet paper to Walmart is like, there's a technical problem to that. And like, what happens if that gets disrupted and people can't get toilet paper? I mean, it's a massive problem. And there was an interesting stat in here, 98% of businesses employing fewer than 500 employees. Like, how does anyone afford a chief supply chain officer, much less the chief security officer at that point?
Right.
But the majority of their business is technical, so you've got to have people who understand that. So the virtual CISOs, or using third parties or outsourced. But it's got to be done, and third party risk is a massive problem for most people. So it's
a huge
addressed.
blind spot. It's a huge blind spot for organizations.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, especially smaller organizations that don't have overall control or understanding of where all these relationships are. Right, you walk into a small organization, they've got all these different software providers all over, but you've never figured out, back to our first segment, who's got what data. Like, I don't know where half of my data is. It's sitting in different systems. Is it sitting in HubSpot? It's sitting over some other system over here. They're all outsourced little vendor relationships that no one's done a risk assessment on.
Right.
And that's before you get into your core software and hardware assets as part of your supply chain.
Yeah, I can guarantee you, if I was a betting man, I could make money on betting on how many businesses with 500 or fewer employees have good inventory or asset management and understand the third-party risk chain. Like, it's a zero.
Right.
Absolutely. Last article, quickly. Maybe not quickly. I mean, this is an article about employee burnout. It is real. It's real in our industry, especially. And I think as leaders, we have to take this concept of employee burnout very seriously. I've seen it transpire through different individuals that have worked for me in the past, and what it does to those individuals. And
Mhm.
eventually they leave, they go somewhere else.
That's right.
Sometimes they just completely disconnect for a while. Like, this is a real thing. And I think as leaders, we have to be cognizant of looking for signs and figuring out how to help our employees as
Yeah.
they hit some of these burnout
And we
phases.
have to be very responsible with it, because I'm hearing stories of folks completely leaving the industry because of burnout. It turns them off completely from being in cybersecurity. I'm getting out of the industry. We can't be losing
Yeah.
talent, right? We can't be shedding talent because of burnout, because of stress, because of anxiety. You know, it's got to be part of our policies and our strategies for retaining personnel, is thinking about that burnout.
Well, I'm interested in you. I'm really interested in your thoughts on a question here. I'll pose it. Like, do we really understand burnout with regard to cyber, and is it the same as every other piece of the organization? And what I mean by that is, look, everybody's burnt out in the org, right? Especially,
Sure.
over the last couple of years with COVID, like salespeople were burnt out because it was a different way of doing
Yep.
business, right? People in HR and the finance are burnt out because they've got less resources to deal with, and it's a challenge figuring out how to change stuff. While that's true, I would say that cyber is one of those areas of the organization, and maybe legal a little bit, depending. I've seen it happen in parts of in different companies based on this as well. Is that we're facing burnout from two sides. One is just the stress and the same thing that the rest of the organization is dealing with in change of business and transformation and just normal business issues. But also, like, there's a large number of organizations where a large percentage of the business doesn't like the security organization. And that may sound strong, but it's this pushback of like, man, they're always trying to stop us from doing stuff. They want to slow down sales. They want to,
Mhm.
make it more difficult for us to send the HR data across the network. Like, we're trying to take a responsibility to protect the business, but it's often perceived in this almost adversarial way. And so the burnout is almost compounded because,
It is.
like, you're dealing with all the normal stress, and then you're like, man, nobody likes me. Like, this
Right.
is a rough job, and everybody thinks I'm trying to be the a-hole, and it's not true. Like, we're trying to do our job, and that lack of feeling like we're on the same team, we're fighting the same good fight, I think really compounds the
It
burnout
does.
problem
It
for
doubles
security
the
stuff.
anxiety, because not only you're
Yeah.
saying, I'm identifying an issue, I want to help solve this issue, but when you're not empowered to actually help resolve the issue, that doubles the anxiety, because now you know there's this risk, right? That you're not getting support from the business in remediating the risk. But now go back up to those previous articles, you're responsible for it. If something bad were to happen, now there's a level of responsibility. So now you're feeling that weight on your shoulders, that you're responsible for this thing that the business will not support you in remediating. That doubles the anxiety.
And that risk doesn't ever go away, right?
Right.
You're always in this fight or flight situation where there's never a period of downtime. There's never not something to do. There's not a end of a sales cycle, end of a quarter. All of those things don't exist in the security industry, and the risk to the business. So the consistent responsibility, that consistent pressure, and the consistent need to always be doing something, because there is always something to do in order to mitigate all of those things. I think that makes it very difficult for people to wrap their heads around if they're not, if they've not done this for a very long time. You get to that 5-year mark and you really start to understand, like, there is no break unless you make a break, and that responsibility has to be set up properly in order to pass that risk to someone else to take a break so that you don't burn out.
Yeah.
And that's very difficult for many people to do.
Yeah. And then every time there's a bump in the night, you're going to get the pit in your stomach.
Yep.
Any bump in the night, you're going to be stressing, right? Because you know you didn't get support from the business to remediate the risks that are out there.
Yeah,
And for those who haven't done it, I mean, it's like going to a party on a 20-story building, and it's on a rooftop deck, and there's a cable rail around the deck, and everybody's having a drink, and the head of sales is sitting against the side of it. You notice that the cable's broken, and you went and say, "Hey, Bob, hey, watch out, the cable's broken. You're going to fall off the back." He would thank you. But if it's a security risk, he's going to go, "Shut up, like, stop bothering me," right?
Right.
And it's the same equivalency of risk.
Yeah. And I think the other thing is the impact of a failure on the security side has some pretty dramatic consequences that I don't know that other parts of the business necessarily have the pressure of as well. So I think it even gets compounded a little more because a data breach to certain organizations could mean the end of certain organizations.
Mhm.
Like, I mean, the stakes are pretty high on top of everything you guys just described.
It could
That
mean
is also
shuttering the
another
doors
variable.
of your business. It could mean shuttering the doors of your business, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, from a leadership side of the aisle and just being able to get in tune with your staff, it's. I think I've said this on the show before. I have an uber eagle eye on utilization of employees, and it's not utilization from a productivity standpoint. It's utilization from a burnout standpoint. If I see folks who are not dedicating time to training, to professional development, to mentorship, and they're constantly working the job, that's a red flag. I've had conversations with my directors and managers. That person, you got to tell them next Friday, their day next Friday off, like it or not. They want to go study, they can go study. If they want to do something related to, professional development, cool. They're off the clock. They're off the clock.
Yeah,
They're not available on
I think
Teams.
that's super important.
Right?
People won't self-identify, right? Like,
No.
you've got to know as a leader that you have to be able to identify those, or get your management teams to identify them.
And you get
you've
folks who
gotta
are workhorses, and they want to be highly utilized, and they want to work hard, and they want to be the ones up at 11 o'clock at night helping a client. But at some point, you have to realize it's going to have a tipping point, and you need to get in front of that so the burnout does not happen. So proactively looking at utilization and saying, you've been 110% utilized for the last 2 weeks. Go take a couple of days off. Go.
And that's super hard because we're all sensitive to budgets, right? But I mean, I think when you look at your budget, you really have to be building utilization tables to make sure that you've got that 10-20% built in.
Yep.
And you're not, if you're utilizing it 100%, you're going to burn your people out, and it's going to fail.
Exactly.
You'll have a bad program.
And you want to know what? Even from a budgetary perspective, it's going to hit my budget if I lose that great employee.
That's right.
It's going to affect my budget. It's going to affect how my company can operate, how my teams can operate. It's going to have an adverse effect. I'd rather be ahead of it.
It's cheaper in the long run. It really is.
Replace, ramp them up. Yes, all the things that happen. Gentlemen, always a pleasure. I'm glad we got back to articles. Such a fun discussion. Thank you, everyone, for watching and listening. We'll see you next week. Oh, wait, 2 weeks on Business Security Weekly. Next week's Memorial Day.